Hello and welcome to Daily Debrief brought to you by People's Dispatch. I'm Pragya. Today we look at why key provisions of Thailand's new law against torture and disappearances, which promised arrestees basic safeguards, is facing a setback. Next up, South Koreans forced into labor in the Second World War are counting on reparations and an apology from Japan. But even as the two countries strive to improve their relations, this discussion is not going smoothly. On Tuesday, Thailand's parliament did not vote on a recent cabinet decree that put off crucial parts of an anti torture and disappearance law. They will now likely hang fire until after the May election. The decision has upset and angered civil rights groups and activists, and torture survivors and families of the victims. Opposition MPs and some in the ruling bloc say the Prayut Chan-o-cha government is using legal tactics to avoid basic legal safeguards for arrestees. Let us ask Anish from People's Dispatch why it is a crucial law and what made it necessary in Thailand. Anish, good to have you back on the show today again. So, Anish, Thailand actually passed this law last year, but they decided to put it off till October this year, and it was supposed to come into effect in February. So, why was this law necessary first? And secondly, what happened today?
Well, let's begin with the fact that this law, the necessity of this law, was something that was felt by not only civil society activists, but also opposition groups and pro democracy groups like what we often call the red shirts in the media, uh, have often been calling for it since for nearly a decade now, at least since when the military pretty much toppled the democratic government of Yingluck Shinawatra, and that was at the time there was definitely massive repression of protesters, of opposition leaders, of civil society groups, activists, and so on. And very often it ended up with a lot of disappearances, a lot of with chargeless arrests that or imprisonments that went on for weeks, months, even. And so, in many of these cases, there was often no police procedure. There were reports of torture being commonly employed when dealing with political protesters. And obviously, when even after the military, at least in its namesake, went out with the formation of the new constitution, and a sort of civic military government came to power under Prayut Chan-o-cha. Many of these practices remained, and we saw that being employed very liberally, so to speak, during the protests, the pro-democracy protests that actually uh, pretty much shook the whole of Thailand during the COVID-19 pandemic, and even before that, since 2019 at least. So, and obviously, the very basis of that protest was also a disappearance that happened outside of Thailand to begin with. So, in all of these cases, there was no measure, there was no legal provision to actually bring those responsible to justice, to actually implicate them for the kind of lapses in police procedures, or even just basic things like reporting an arrest on the day that it happened to authorities and to the public prosecutor, is something that almost never happened in such kind of arrest, please. And so this law was brought in to pretty much mitigate the capability of the police to inflict damage on civilians. It wasn't something that was. What was interesting is that it came from an alliance partner of the government at the time, the Democratic Party, and it was them. It was one of their ministers who actually suggested passing of the bill. So it was eventually passed by a sort of bipartisan, as we say in sort of U.S. linguistic, political language, but it's kind of like it had both opposition and government lawmakers supporting it, and it was overwhelmingly passed. And the police force was given over 4 months to actually prepare for, uh, to be for the enforcement of this law, which was supposed to be enforced after February 22nd. Right now, the government has pretty much put a hold on certain sections between section 22 and 25 that includes installation of body cameras, dash cams, cameras during interrogation, for physical examination of people who get arrested, for reference for not just the courts, but also for the public prosecutor, the lawyers, and the family members of those who of the detainees, and informing local authorities of the arrest itself. So these are some of the very basic provisions that could be done, even if the government's argument that it does not have the budget right now to install or to bring in body cameras on
Right.
police forces. Uh, so, the necessity of this, like definitely, opposition groups, and not just opposition groups, even many in the government, the ruling bloc at the moment are opposed to this decree, and the fact that the government is trying to push through it and deal with it right after the elections happen shows that it really does not want a democratic consensus on the matter right now.
Right, Anish, and what happened today, and how will this affect the? Will this have any impact on the election, for example?
Well, there is the impact of it is going to be kind of um, complicated to talk about, because we have seen the impact of the pro-democracy protests, especially when the Bangkok governor elections happened, and when the pro-government bloc and all the parties were pretty much defeated, and it was swept over by somebody who supported the protest, an independent candidate, more or less. So these things are definitely, there is a significant anti-incumbency right now, and with elections just being months away, obviously this is going to play a big part in the discourse that is going to happen. So we need to, like, we can see how we need to wait and see how the opposition right now is going to take this matter forward. We are already seeing the Democratic Party being vehemently against this decree, and also even pointing out that the Constitutional Court should actually, dismiss it and go ahead and allow for the full enforcement of the law. So there is obviously cracks in the ruling bloc as well. We are seeing the cracks having happened between Prayut and his own party earlier, and that is obviously going to have its own repercussions later. So we need to wait and see. Opinion polls keep varying between opposition and Prayut candidates all the time. So that can never be taken. That can only be taken with a pinch of salt. But the talk about police excesses is definitely a key political talking point, a political contention that will have its effect in the elections in the coming days, even.
Right, Anish. Thanks for that update. And Anish, we'll be back with you in just another minute or two. South Korea's Supreme Court ruled in 2018 that Japan owes compensation to those South Koreans who were forced into labor in Japan during World War II. South Korean President Moon Suk-yeol's government proposed a plan last year on how Japan could pay these reparations. But the Fumio Kishida government isn't inclined to agree with the plan or even the notion of reparation. It's a tightrope walk for both countries as challenges arise from both history and the future. Let's return to Anish for this. Right, Anish. So, Anish, reparations, never an easy topic. How do people in Japan and South Korea and their governments view this differently? What are the conflicting views here?
Well, there are always this, nationalistic approach that often color these discussions in Korea, South Korea, and not just the Korean Peninsula overall. This is definitely a matter of, uh, you know, uh, unsettled parts of the decolonization process that happened in the 1940s. And so these things are going to have significant impact if Japan does not own up to it. As far as the Koreans are concerned, Japan does not own up to the crimes that it has committed, not only of colonizing the country, but also of, taking wartime labor, and other issues include, comfort women, as we've talked about in the show as well. So these questions are going to always play a big role in the ties, or in relationships between South Korea and Japan all the time, as long as there is no proper definitive deal that can actually take care of justice. In the case of Japan, we have always seen a sort of strong nationalist approach dominating the matter. It is not that there are people who have called for the Japanese government. We have seen socialists and communists always take the stand of calling on the government to own up to these crimes and own up to the crimes that were committed and pay reparations, due reparations to the victims of these crimes. But the Japanese government, the ruling conservative bloc has always avoided these questions, have often taken to, the 1965 agreement to wash off its hands. Now, we have to also talk about the 1965 agreement very briefly. Japan often uses that as its defense against any talks of, reparations and resettlement of its victims. The 65 agreement very clearly only deals with the question of violated sovereignty of the Korean Peninsula and Japan's crime of colonizing the country. It does not talk about any of the individual crimes of officers, not only within Korea, but also of forced labor that has happened in Japan as well, and of forced transportation of people, a large number of people, and pushed into all sorts of slavery, be it their minds or be it sexual exploitation. These things have happened, and Japan does not own up to it. Neither does the Treaty of 1965 deal with that. This is what the recent court rulings have talked about. The 2018 rulings on forced labor talked about, which are very individual crimes that have happened, that included not just the Japanese state, but also corporations, Japanese corporations that operated at the time, that made use of forced labor provisions in the Japanese law and the colonial law to profit very significantly from these exploitation. So these things are something that will remain unresolved as long as Japan owns up to it. And the South Korean government at the moment, being a conservative government, often has this thing because it is quite close to the conservative ruling bloc in Japan. It wants to be very tightly knit with the whole pro-US bloc in the region. But on the other hand, it has this sort of, it has always catered to the nationalist sentiments in the island. So, not being as forthcoming on these matters, on matters of Japanese crimes in Korea, will definitely affect its standing and its image as a nationalist force in the long run. So it often tries to, play both sides. And right now, even the deal that we have, it is trying to make use of the reparation fund that were given to South Korean companies as reparation in the 1965 agreement, and make use of funds from these companies to pay for the victims instead of Japan paying for the victims or apologizing for the crimes. So it is sort of a cop out in many ways, and many of the victims have opposed this sort of bargain, a compromise on their family members who either died or were victims for a very long time throughout that colonial period.
Anish, but these are also two countries which are trying to mend their rocky past and try to look forward, and there's a lot of military talk between them. So what is the association between these two very disparate sort of parts of their past and their future?
Well, we have to understand that the conservative bloc in South Korea is just one part of it. We have seen that whenever the liberals were in power, the matters of Japanese crimes, its colonial crimes, were something that were very often taken up, as it happened in the previous administration of President Moon Jae-in, where he actually brought up, these factors, even supported court rulings that call for reparations to the victims. So this is something that we see only happening, this sort of attempt to mend ties by making compromises only happening or very often happening during a conservative government power. And the current administration obviously does not want to create any sort of tensions because it understands very well that Japan is, or at least the Japanese government right now, the way in which it exists, which is trying to militarize itself, which is trying to expand its military presence in the region, and is trying to very clearly, pretty much double its military budget and very clearly go into, a very confrontational position with respect to Russia and China and also North Korea. Shows that it is not going to obviously own up to its crimes, no matter what geostrategic advantage it might gain in Korea. So South Korean government is trying to pretty much take the fall on this matter and make use of Korean companies, including state-owned companies that gained from the 1965 agreement, including who also gained from the reparations money that was meant to be supposedly for victims of individuals who were affected by Japanese colonization, which was a very vague sort of clause within the 1965 agreement, which is often which Japan often says was meant to be for the victims of these crimes and not for was taken by these companies. And now South Korea is trying to use these companies to pay for these victims right now as a sort of a compromise. So, which is something also many of the victims and their family members are not very keen on going for. They want a clear apology. It is not necessarily the reparations that matter to them. It is it is the apology and the fact that Japan will own up to the fact that it has had a very dark history when it comes to its colonial presence in East Asia. And that is something that matters a lot more than just, monetary compensation to the victims.
Danish, and thanks a lot for joining us. And that's all we have for you today. Thank you for watching Daily Debrief. To come back to us tomorrow, you can visit our website for more People's Dispatch stories and watch our regular updates on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.